I'm a big fan of the history of recording, and specifically when it comes to the history of modern recording techniques. I think that there's a lot of really cool people that influenced it and had major contributions, people like Tom Dowd or George Massenburg, but it really comes down to the meat and potatoes of two people. The first one being Bill Putnam. Now, Bill Putnam, to me, has always held a very special spot, likely because I started my career at East West Studios, 6000 Sunset, which is historically Western Recorders, the studio that Bill Putnam built in the mid-60s to work with Frank Sinatra. Starting my career there gave me firsthand experience with all of the things that Bill Putnam had created and done for the world of recording. Now, as important as Bill Putnam is to me, I think there is a second person who has always held a very equal and important spot. And in fact, his rivalry with Bill Putnam was the reason why modern recording came so far. That person is Les Paul. Most people know Les Paul as the creator of one of the most popular guitars of all time, but he was also a legend in the recording world. He invented so many concepts that had never been done before, and is by most considered to be the father of modern multi-track recording. Recently, I was invited to East West's sister studio, United Recording, which is right next door at 6050 Sunset, for the opening of Les Paul Recording Studio. Now, I love United Recording. It is every bit as legendary as East West is, and was also built by Bill Putnam and was once part of the United Western Complex, where so many amazing records have been made. For the party, I got to pop into Studio A. I made some really cool records in Studio A back in the day. It was cool to see that the Focusrite is still up and running in there, and it's still a functioning studio. Now, the Les Paul Foundation was able to get all of this original recording gear that Les Paul had used, and they put it into United Recording for the Les Paul Recording Studio. This is an authentic look at all of Les Paul's recording equipment. Now, although it was cool seeing Kenny Aronoff and Greg Bissonette hanging out, it was not the time or place to get more information on this really cool project that they have set up. So I asked Tom Camusso, who is in charge of all of this legendary recording studios gear, if I could come back and get a private interview with him and talk about what he is doing at this cool spot at 6050 Sunset in Hollywood. So this is the inside look at the Les Paul Recording Studio inside the United Recording building.
Console and the tape
Amazing.
machine. So it's essentially the first the first real console. Everything before.
This is the octopus or whatever?
This is the monster, that's the octopus.
That's the octopus. This is the monster, that's the octopus.
So that's literally the first multi-track, and this is, like the first console with busing.
Man.
So everything before it would be a mixer.
So that's just his 3-track, which it also has a sync head.
Right.
But the problem was with that, he was the only guy who had one. So he couldn't talk to the rest of the world.
Right.
So that was brought in about the same time period.
But it was really just a way to communicate with everyone else.
So I'm here with Tom. Tom has resurrected this amazing situation here. This is the Les Paul Recording Studio. This is Les Paul's actual recording console. These are his actual tape machines. How did this all start?
So this was in Les's house.
In New Jersey or?
In New Jersey.
Right.
Up until he passed. And then it got put into a museum in Mahwah, New Jersey.
Okay.
And it's been there ever since. And how we get here was the foundation, after Les passed, they brought all of the recordings to the Library of Congress. It sat there for a while just because you get into the queue.
Are these magnetic recordings or do they digitize? Everything's just still the original tape. Okay.
Tape and acetates.
Wow.
So they bring it all down. It sat in the queue for a while, wasn't moving. So one of the guys who works for the foundation, Steve Rosenthal, had friends there and put together a deal where we put our own crew together, sent them down there for 10 months. And they transferred everything.
Right.
So we expedited that. got through all that. That was like 33,000 recordings. So they had everything from when he was 14 to
Wow.
like 2 months before he passed.
Yeah. So here's a really funny thing about Les Paul that I think a lot. So if you look at most people, if you say Les Paul, they immediately are just guitar,
The guitar,
right? It's
yeah.
like if that were all he ever did, that would be a tremendous accomplishment. It is one of the most used guitars in the history of the world. It is unchanged practically from when he made it in 1952 to current day. But the other side of that is Les Paul was one of the most prolific recording engineers of all time and invented a good 60% of what we consider modern recording techniques at this point.
Yeah,
So when
and-
you say he had thousands of recordings, like he literally had thousands upon thousands of recordings.
Yeah, it was like 33,000 recordings of just everything. So once they transferred it all, we started going through it and just seeing what was there. So there was like 3 periods of his sort of evolution of multi-tracking.
Okay.
So the first is the sound on sound machine, which I think you've seen before. It's
Yeah.
just like the mono tape machine with the extra playback head.
Yes.
And
that was also another big contribution to his, because without that extra playback head,
that's the birth of multi-track.
That's
right
it.
there.
That's
the holy
multi-track. If you
grail.
cannot play back before it records, you cannot hear what is happening. You can't do the entire process of
so that
overdubbing.
launches all of it. But
Yes.
and all of the first hits, like How High the Moon, all done on that machine. So, and we still have that. That's still in a museum.
Wow.
The thing with that was he quickly realized that if he messed up, it was destructive.
Right.
So he'd have to start all over again. So then he evolves into, if I can get another tape machine or 2 record lathes,
Right.
he can go disc to disc or tape to tape, and that's a big chunk of his archive. So he'd record to one, rewind it, play it back, play
record,
along,
but
record
yeah,
to the
they're
other.
both.
So, and then he eventually gets to the real multi-track with
Right.
the sync head. In the archive, we noticed that he kept everything. So he left us this wealth of just all this stuff. And in it was every tape to tape and disc to disc. So you have every iteration of what he's doing, or like stem sort of thing.
Right.
They're all mono bounced, but you can see the process.
For engineers, like seeing that kind of stuff, it's like it's literally like if you could current day open up a Pro Tools session and like look and see like, oh wow, they started with the guitar and then they recorded the vocal and then they recorded. It's like you can see, it's like forensically you can trace exactly how all of this process was done, even like to the decisions that were made and why they were made. You know,
and it always evolved when you started seeing how he was doing it. But the original idea was, once we saw we had that, was like, okay, if you put them all together and flipped every other one out of phase, would it phase out and make just isolate what was there, and you can make a multi-track. So that was the original idea, but it didn't work because the tape machine spun
too much. There's too much flutter, and
they were old machines and they drifted. But it sort of got the wheel spinning. So what eventually we ended up doing was, so we took all that stuff and used some software to get it to line up.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked with this company, Cedar. I don't know if you know those guys, but so they basically had some software that would read, like if you had a tape that was like warbling in speed, it would read the bias line,
right,
straighten that out, and it would straighten out your thing. We couldn't use that because Les's tapes had 30 bias lines because he was going back and forth, so it would freak out. So they worked with us to figure out a way to manually do it. So I could get every stem in this, like each stem tree library kind of thing, to line up within a cycle.
Wow.
Still wouldn't phase out, but at least we had them all lined up.
Right.
It was a little more uniform. So then the next thing we did was started using all the new AI stuff. The problem that I was trying to solve was, in Les's mixes, because he could multi-track, he was the only guy who could do it.
Right.
And every time he was going tape to tape, he was adding a generation to tape hiss and
baking. There's
in,
degradation and everything.
It just bakes in. So when you get to like listening to the mixes, they're pretty crunchy even by the standard of what everyone else was doing, because he was doing this process. You were so blown away by the production, no one really paid attention to it. You sort of overlooked that because you've never heard guitars like harmonized that way, and half speed and double speed, and Mary was singing on top of herself, so the vocals were so tight. It was like blew people away. But my thought was, is if we could figure out a way, because we have these stem trees, to get the, first time something appears, we could make a cleaner,
Yeah.
mix of it. We get them all lined up, and then started using AI, and it normally that stuff is kind of hit or miss, because
Yeah.
if you've ever used it, you try to demix something that's really thick.
Definitely.
It really doesn't
yeah,
work.
Yeah, it has, I mean, at the end of the day, it still is just trying to distinguish like frequencies that blend together. Like a guitar, a bass, and a vocal are all kind of having similar frequencies that their fundamentals rely on, and you'll get a little, or like cymbals too for drums a lot of times. Like they a lot of artifacts. Sounds kind of crappy overall,
But this stuff worked really well because it wasn't very dense.
Yeah.
And we had it incrementally. So I wasn't fighting the whole mix. I was picking at it as it evolved. And Les always tended to record the new track like 10 dB too loud. I don't know if it's because the headphones weren't great, or he just wanted to hear what he was doing.
Right.
So it really was easy to pick it apart. So we were able to basically, pick away at this stuff until we had a multi-track.
Wow.
So we remixed 2 songs. They sounded really good. We were able to do them in stereo. Les never really had anything in stereo.
Right.
And clean up all of the noise in there as it came in, and just get everything first generation. And when we listened to it, it was like, wow, this is pretty mind-blowing, the difference. And I can play some stuff. So then Michael Braunstein, who's the head of the foundation, said, well, we have the stuff in the museum. How cool would it be to pull it out, restore it, and mix everything on the console?
Yeah.
I was, I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we got a team of guys. It was 3 guys in Brooklyn. I have a studio in Brooklyn. We basically moved it into my live room and had 3 guys for 10 months just go at it, and restored the tape machine, the console, like just basically went through everything. Nothing was changed. Everything basically worked.
Right.
If things needed to be swapped or tubes, it was all new old stock.
Right.
So everything is exactly the way it was. It just works. Like all of these buttons were frozen. So not only were they clean, but each spring was hand retention.
Right.
I mean, it was like incredible amount of work. We did that. We got it working. And then, it just keeps snowballing. So it's like, well, now it works, and we're going to, mix Les's archive on it. What else can we do?
Yeah.
So, and the mission of the foundation has always been, Les set it up before he passed, and really what he wanted to do was just educate kids so that the next generation doesn't think he's just a guitar.
Right.
And sort of let them know what he's done, and also, keep his music out there, keep his music going. And Les always wanted to improve on hearing aids. So the foundation does a lot of work with hearing aid research, because he was never happy with how they sounded. So this place sort of now serves as not only a studio, like we figured, let's put it here, let people use it. You could rent it, but we do a ton of education. We're doing, like master classes for kids. We've had Carnegie Mellon here and Syracuse University, record the kids, let them do that. We have plans to get some cameras set up so we can start doing sessions with, now there's all this sort of like audio movers and stuff where you can have kids in Australia recording through the console and doing classes. And we're working on restoring his lathe. So we're going to have that here so you can record straight to disc, and bring in, try to get some famous people to come in and do songs and generate some press.
Yeah, I think it's such a cool process, especially the way that this is set up, because like I think first off, I completely agree with this. Like kids are really important, right? It's like getting kids to understand this process, because we've been so disconnected from this process now. Like it's now the the GarageBand, Logic, Ableton, FL Studio world, like all these like computer DAWs, they put kids one generation away from what we all had to grow up with, was like kind of not much better than this in our garages, when I was a kid, it was just, we had a little 4-track tape machine in the garage, and it basically had not much more than what you're looking at here. And that's the principles of how we grew up as kids, was like, putting it up in the garage and trying to figure out. Now there's a little bit, the technology has separated us a little bit from this process. You know, it's like we kind of just look at everything as like waveforms in a computer, but there's something really cool, especially with like Les Paul being the way that he, you know, he would multi-track and he would come up. You mentioned before, I think this is so interesting. Like, it wasn't just a guitar. It wasn't just the recording process. He invented flanging. He invented like phasing. He invented effects. He invented
first chambers.
Yes,
tape delay.
I mean, literally. I saw you speak at NAMM with Bill Putnam Jr. And I laughed because, of course, he's invested in telling everybody that, like, oh, you know, like Les Paul and Bill. And I am a huge history nut. I'm a huge fan of like those guys' friendly rivalry and everything. But it's like, in terms of recording, it's literally Bill and Les. Like they did everything, and everybody else after that was just adding little bits and pieces.
And to what you were saying earlier about how the guitar hasn't changed, it's still the same thing. The process of how he's laid this out, and it's still the same. I mean, this console has got some weird quirks and it does weird things, and I can show you some of the stuff.
Yeah.
But essentially, we have drawings of like Les did of this even 4 years prior to having it, done. And he's thinking about how it's going to work when the tape machine works. And it's still very similar. Like when we have the kids come in from the classes, they'll come in and they'll look at the rack and they'll go, oh, I know what that, they'll like point at 1176. Right. I know what that is. And they go, didn't know that was a real thing.
Right.
They have the plug-in. Yeah. So they're like, oh, it was a real thing. I thought that was just how it looked in the plug-in.
Connecting kids to this whole process and seeing those things and like understanding where it comes from. Like, to me, that's why I'm so fascinated in this studio in general, is like, to me, understanding these core principles, these beginnings. I joke about this every year when NAMM comes around, that, you know, every year it seems like I'm doing a session next door at East West, and there is not a piece of equipment inside of that studio that is newer than 1980. And then I go to the world's newest gear exposition where everybody's talking about the greatest and the newest, and really it's a whole bunch of people rehashing the same ideas that Les Paul and Bill Putnam came up with 70 years ago. You know, and it's amazing. I find it like, if we can get more kids to understand these things, to get the basics, that's where the passion for this comes from. That's where Les's passion came from. Was he was literally a kid who just was like, oh, that's cool, like a radio, like you can make one of those. Like, and then from there it became, okay, well, what else can I do? And what else can I do? And what else can I do? And innovating constantly and bringing these new ideas in. His earliest career was just literally a garage, the most limited technology.
And it was right up the street from here, right on Curzon and Sunset.
Exactly.
And it's crazy now that this is here in the building that Bill Putnam built.
I know it is. So it's so cool. Sort of... It's a very circular thing. I think it's very cool that they had such a scientific rivalry between the two of them. Like, it was never about who was doing a bigger record with, because Bill was working with Frank Sinatra and Les Paul started off with Bing Crosby, and there's a lot of crossover between the people that they work with. Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra bankrolled this whole United Western complex. So it's like, between the two of them, they didn't care about records. They were just over here like, well, actually I kind of was multi-tracking before you did.
Because I had some of the guys from Fender here the other day, and they were talking about how Les and Leo were best friends. Like, it was all sort of like this, everyone's just sort of feeding off each other.
Yeah, and that's the coolest thing about the early days of this industry, is there is no singular person that is responsible for it. They all were feeding off of like ideas that one would come up with, and then the next would be like, oh, I can make that better. And they were constantly trying to one up each other scientifically. But to me, what I think is so cool about engineering, what I love the most about engineering, is that, to me, it is the perfect meeting point between art and technology, between art and science. It's like between soul and science. It's like you have all this actual technology, especially in those early days. If this broke, there was no one to call to. There was no, I'll just look it up on the internet and figure out the plans. It was like, well, I gotta just fix it,
Mhm.
you know? And so these guys were, you know, especially Les too, because Bill was so much more of like a engineer,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's like Les he was a
He was,
top musician.
yeah.
He was one of the best
He
musicians
also
in the
was
world.
at the same time was inventing the shredder. He was like, you know,
Yeah.
he was the first shredder. Like we always say, he was the guy who took the guitar from the back of the stage to the front of the stage.
I laugh about that. I saw a TikTok video recently where this guy he was like a kid, and he was shredding, and the caption over the thing said like, imagine if the first, you know, electric guitarist saw this. And I was like, if Les Paul saw that, he would be like, "You're a little slow, kid.
Yeah.
you're not really doing all that great. Not that impressive, man." You know, like people don't know that, but you know, Les Paul was on the level of, you know, Yngwie Malmsteen or whatever you consider to be the best like shredder guitarist or whatever today.
Yeah.
You know, even modern kids would look at like Polyphia and like Tim Henson, but like that's the level that Les Paul was on. If you watch some of those old videos, he is just like the first person ever to do that. And then all of the things that came with recording were just really to accent how good he was of a guitarist.
Yeah,
you know?
and every level of, like, you know, I've gotten so deep into Les now that every aspect of his life, he was never satisfied. He always kept pushing, and even down to like when he was recording the music, and we've been, you know, digging through all the files, and you would see a pattern of how he does stuff. And then I'd be like, oh, I think I've decoded the best way to break this stuff apart, to redo it. And then it would all change, and you'd go, why is it all different? And then you'd dig, and you'd go, oh, you know, he realized he can put the guitar solo in this part here,
Right.
like, and then from there on, like, he was never happy. Like everything and every piece of gear we have of his, it's been touched. Like, you know, all the guitars, those are all his guitars,
Yeah.
and they've all been messed with. Like you'll look at it and go, oh wait, there's another jack.
Yeah.
On the bottom. Like, what does that one do? So, you know,
it's so interesting. He was such a tinkerer, you know, and it's like such a beautiful thing to me. I love that concept. I love that idea. That's what makes me love engineering. It's what gives me such a passion for it, is that like, just because I have figured it out this way, what if I try another way? What if I do this other thing? What if I try? And Les was just such a tinkerer with everything. I was watching him perform with his Les Pulverizer, you know? And I was thinking about how, modern internet stuff, right? We have TikTok and everything, and we'll always get these like cool little videos of people doing live looping stuff and just recently I saw a video with Ed Sheeran talking about how he does his live looping experience, and it's this whole thing, and people were in the comments like, this is so revolutionary the way he's doing this, and you couldn't, it's amazing, and I was like, man, Les Paul literally invented that before digital recording, before there was even like that simple of a concept. He's looping live on stage and still playing back with himself and doing all these different parts.
He even there's a picture out in the hallway of him with the microphone and with a coat hanger holding it up.
Yeah.
That was him.
Yeah.
You still have it. That was the first one. Like, he was
so
like,
funny.
I want to play the harmonica and the guitar at the same time. Oh. There's so many levels. Like, there's, tape delays and chambers, and it just goes on and on and on. So
it's so cool to see that this is something that is getting a new life here, because like, again, I think it's so important for people to see this. It's why I wanted, like, more than any of the other studios that I've toured recently, I'm like, man, I really want to come in here and talk about this, because like, this was it was pivotal, it was game changing, and it was so important to what we have now as recording and his process and everything. And it's so cool because he already had a lasting legacy. If he did nothing other than the Les Paul, that would be enough to be,
or the music
permanent. Yeah.
Or the multi-track.
He is the only person to be both in the Inventors Hall of Fame and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
No. Well, it will blow your mind. So check this out. So in the console, so it's an 8-channel, 3-bus mono console. So
you know, it's got tons of crazy less stuff. Like he didn't have vibrato in his amp, so he built it into the console.
Right.
So all of his vibratos here in hard returns to 5 and 6.
Wow.
He always sat here and played at the thing. So he put machine control in the console, which you don't see until like SSL does it in the 80s.
Yeah.
He's got the record enables are in here.
Wow.
So the tape machine, while it's 8-track, you can only record 3 at a time, or you'll melt the erase head.
Right.
So they built it so you can only put 3 in. So you have like your ABC bus. You know, these are your bus levels. The brown ones, the black ones are your channels 4 and 4. You have a 1, 2, 3 ABC bus. So say your first 3 tracks you want on A. This one you'll put on B, and the rest of them on C. These 3 go down to your A bus, and then you say, all right, I'll put that on track 1. B, this is your B bus, put that on track 2, or 4, 5, and that's all C, and that's how you assign there. So it's all built in right here. And then on channel 1, he pulled the mic line out of it and hardwired a guitar cable, so he can just always be sitting right here.
That's amazing.
And direct right into 1. So, and it's like this is really what separates it from everything else, is stuff like, it's got its own like monitor section, like a jukebox return kind of thing. It's got a bunch of 2-track return stuff here. It's got 4 more passive mic pre's that dump down to 1 mic pre with busing and an echo send. Every channel's got its own echo send. You can actually use the echo return as another mic pre because they only had chambers, so it was just a send and a mic pre.
Right.
So he also put the vary speed into the tape machine, into the console.
Yeah, because he was again instrumental in
half speed
recording
speed.
and double speed recording.
Eventually, after the Octopus, he got a 16-track,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a box he built. We don't have it here, but he built this other box that interfaced this into the 16-track, and then he got a quad 8 console that was even bigger, and then he got an API. I mean, he was always pushing and pushing and pushing. But
that's really amazing.
This is like really where this in the tape machine is really where the way we record now was basically figured out and really hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And he built this with Ray Norma, who built the Fairchild.
Oh, wow.
So when you talk about like the quality of the build,
right,
it was built at the exact same time he was building the 660. So it was like,
wow.
It really, the technology didn't get any better than this. This is really,
Again, it's very funny. I go back to the NAMM conversation, but it's like every single year, what do we have at NAMM? We have another company releasing their re-release of we made a Fairchild and we swear it's exactly like the original. It's like everybody is still reaching back into the origins.
I'll show you the inside of this thing, and when you see how the build quality, you realize why everyone just wants to keep going back.
It's not light, huh?
No, it's about 1,000 pounds. But these are all the pre's. Les called them gunboats. But you can just see, the build of this, the quality and the time, everything's point to point.
That's another thing about today's stuff is like back then, everything was hand wired because it had to be.
Yeah.
You didn't have another choice.
Yeah. I mean, literally, this is the point where they said, okay, it works. Let's just figure out how to make it bigger, faster, and cheaper.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like all these things now are smaller and
they're all on a piece of tinfoil on a printed circuit board.
Wow.
So rather than your music going through a little piece
it's so
of tinfoil.
beautiful and so clean. You can tell that it's always been loved and everything. I'm sure you guys put a lot of work into restoring and everything, but you can see it. It's still these are still the old caps. These are still all the same.
Yeah, I mean, if you build it right, and like this is great. He just screwed a Shure microphone in for the talkback.
That's so funny. Bill Putnam was very similar with this kind of stuff. Is they were very practical. We are going to do whatever is the smartest, easiest thing to do right now. Less some of his knowledge and some of his supplies came from the Army. He's in the Army for a while.
It's funny because when we got this here, everything was working. We have Pro Tools set up as well because you kind of have to. The console did not want to talk to Pro Tools. And I mean, it was all kooky. The console's pin 3 hot. That's all pin 2 hot. This building on this side is pin 2 hot. That side is pin 3 hot. We have tie lines to the old, Bill's
Right.
chambers, which are pinned 3 high. Like everything is crazy.
Yes.
So I could not figure out how to get everything happy, and Pro Tools was the big problem. So the way Les had everything coming in was with these old military style Cinch Jones connectors.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So I was trying to do everything through the patch bay, and it was just nuts. So I ended up going out to the valley to that place Apex
Mm-hmm.
and digging around for like 2 days, and I found 2 more exact plugs.
Wow.
And I ended up wiring them up to new snakes that go to Pro Tools.
That's awesome.
And then as soon as I plugged it in the way Les made it, it all worked.
It all worked.
And it all works exactly like it automatically goes to the line returns, the buses bus to Pro Tools, so
Right.
it works exactly the same way. But yeah, I mean, they were just using what was available.
It's funny. I've seen so much of Bill's work in these buildings because I spent a huge portion of my career here in next door. You know, I did the first full record I ever did was actually in this room with Vic Mensa when No ID was in here, and we camped out in here for 6 months working. He used to have an 88R in here, you know,
That was here when we got here.
Yeah, yeah, and I spent a ton of time in here. I spent a ton of time in A here, which was JJP's old room, and then next door, East West is my birthplace, if you will. Yeah, I spent most of my time at East West, and I did for East West for a large part of my early days there, where it was doing exactly that. You know, Studio 3 was the same thing. Studio 3, the console is unbalanced on the inserts, but it's balanced on the inputs, and it's got pin 3 hot going into the outboard gear, but all the outboard gear is expecting pin 2 hot, and there was so many times where you'd patch into something and then it would just disappear. And you're like, what the hell is going on? Why isn't this? And then figuring all that stuff out and like learning all that stuff, but then seeing how the rooms themselves, like Studio 3 over there, which is the Pet Sounds room, and seeing how that was built and the practicality of what those guys was doing was so important. It was like, we have come so far now. Like we have these studios that have been like from the ground up built with full acoustics in mind, and everything is like planned and down to the inch of everything, and every sound is accounted for and everything. But you go to those rooms next door and these rooms here, and it was basically like, I got like this space here. I'm just gonna, I don't know, I'll put like a panel up here and I'll put some stuff over here. It'll probably be fine. You know? And those are the rooms, Studio 3 is one of the most copied small rooms in the entire world because of Pet Sounds, because of the Mamas and Papas, because of all the legendary stuff that's been done in there. And Studio A here and Studio 1 over there, you can see just between those two rooms, Bill started over here in A, and then he figured some stuff out. And then he was like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this. Next time I do a big room, I'm going to do this, you know? And even his panels on the wall and the way that he did everything, he was always learning lessons. And I see the same thing in Les's work too, where it's like you figure something out one day, and then the next time you're not going to get screwed by that. I also, one of my favorite things, I read about this recently was reading how many times Les Paul almost died.
Well, his arm was set
His arm was set permanently so he could continue playing guitar.
From a car accident.
Yeah. And he electrocuted himself in his basement and almost died. He was,
rock and roll is a dangerous business.
That is about as rock and roll as you can get. I love that about him. It's like he really was in service of the entire thing.
Yeah. These are the stems I was telling you about. So this is what he left in the archive for us. So on the tape-to-tape stuff. So on your first generation, you'd have just bass and guitar. And then on the second one, bass, guitar, and you'll see when Mary starts singing, it comes in. And remember I was telling you about how he recorded the new track way louder? You can see that's the guitar and bass, and this will be the vocal when it comes in. So that's the second stem. Third stem, it adds another vocal. So it just keeps adding and adding and adding. The problem though was, like I was telling you, is they drift like crazy. And by the time you can see they start,
you can
at the
see,
same,
yeah,
at the end,
yeah.
it's nuts.
So this is all lined up.
So these are the same ones, but now you can see all the transients are lined up.
Right.
So like I was showing you, so this is the first one again, same thing, just guitar bass. But when I demix, you'll hear just the bass
Nice.
and guitar. And then so that's, I pull that out of the first set, the first stem, and now the second one, don't want the guitar, don't want the bass, just want that vocal.
If your lips should stray.
I mean, I know you've done work to repair these, but even so, the quality of this is phenomenal.
That's what I mean.
you
It
know?
really
It's
lent
like-
well to the process, and I'm using a cocktail of like a million things,
Sure,
and
sure.
pre-EQing things, and
But the fact that you can even get that is such a testament to what he was doing already.
yeah.
You know, it's like the fact that you can even get it that good is
Sure.
so crazy.
yeah. So that's the whole idea, is just to pull everything the first time it appears and really keep it clean. Now, that song we haven't mixed, but I'll play you one that we have. This is a song called "Smoke Rings," and I'll play you a little bit of the
original.
just to get your ears kind of used to it. And you can hear that crunchiness I was telling you about.
Those smoke rings I blow.
3-part harmony, every word. Sure.
To be able to line up that perfectly, to get everything that clean, like you just really, I mean, it's a testament to how good Les was at even just working with his own stuff and being able to do it, because it's like the timing of all this is amazing.
Yeah,
it's
and-
so hard to do this.
And a lot of people don't realize Mary's playing guitar and all this stuff too,
Right,
rhythm. She's
right.
an incredible guitar player on top of being an incredible singer, and kind of gets lost to history because in Les's shadow,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
just so much to Les that no matter how good you are,
Yeah.
this is the restored mix.
Tell me, where do they
Wow.
go? Those smoke rings I blow each night.
So you can really treat the bass,
Right.
compress and EQ everything,
What do they do?
and this is stereo slightly. It's not like
Right.
you don't want to be distracting, but
Yeah.
it's just a little
Yeah,
wider.
just give it a little bit more space for everything to exist.
Yeah. So once we started, going through this and sort of making a multi-track, we started listening to it stripped down because, like I was saying, he did a lot of overdubbing. So again, you're always sort of brought into the production. Like that's the first thing you start talking about.
Right.
It's like, oh my God, how great this is. But when you strip it down to one vocal, one guitar, bass, you then start listening to the music differently. And those guitar licks start feeling like you start going, oh my God, he's an incredible, there's so
Yeah.
much feel there. And you hear the song totally different. The idea is we're going to be putting out a box where you'll have all the originals, mono, remastered, but how Les had them, then the restored mixes, and then another batch, what we're calling the first take mixes. And that's these. And check this out, because these are really stunning.
Me, where do they go? The smoke rings I blow each night.
One guitar,
Yeah.
just so and it's also not so dated to 1955. It's just more classic.
Yeah.
Why do they seem to picture
It's so incredible.
Yeah, and like when you get into these parts, you can hear how really the clarity.
puff, 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 puff your cares away.
So, and again, it's the exact same mono recording.
Tell me,
Yeah.
It's like until you hear the comparison, you don't
Yeah.
realize how far you've come.
Yeah.
But it's a slow process of just slowly picking away at it and taking from each one of these stems he's left
That's
us.
so amazing.
Yeah, and you really can restore it and get it, because also nowadays everyone's listening, streaming, earbuds, and that distortion right into your brain is kind of hard to
Yeah.
absorb. We're never going to make it as cool as Les's originals, and we're not trying. but in the spirit of Les and always trying to push everything.
Man, and that's the thing. If Les was here today, he would absolutely
Oh my God.
be. You know, I think it's funny. It's kind of like the Beatles didn't use autotune conversation. If John
They
Lennon
had it,
could
they
have
would.
used,
Yeah.
if John Lennon had
Yeah.
autotune, he'd have used the hell out
Yeah.
of autotune. He would have
Well, they
loved
say
it.
if they had
yeah.
Pro Tools, they'd still be mixing Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think that's the thing that sometimes we'll get stuck on these types of things as engineers. Like it's like, well, the original thing, and well, but there was so much. Those guys were on the cutting edge of technology constantly. They would have loved to use the stuff that we have today. They would have thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and they would have done it constantly.
Yeah. And we're not trying to beat the mix. We're just
Right.
really,
Just-
it's
honestly,
an
you're just
opportunity
giving
to
it
educate
its
people and show them and just push the envelope.
You're
and,
giving it its flowers more than anything. It's like, again, if Les could have done that final recording or that restored recording, he absolutely
he would have. He
would
would have got there.
Yes, he would have done that.
He would have been doing it already. He would
Yeah.
have just beat us to doing it by 5
he
years.
would have 100% been that. He was
And he left
obsessed
us
with that.
these assets. So without these stems, none of this is possible. And it's funny because it took so long to figure out how to sort of do this and decode it, and it works for no one else.
Yes.
Because it's not like you can take this and go, oh, there's this other archive. It's only for Les.
It's only for Les. It's only
he
for
left
what he
all of
recorded.
the stuff that basically made it possible.
That's amazing.
So it's pretty interesting.
Honestly, these are the types of things that if I can give people who don't understand the principles of recording, who have never been inside a real studio, if I could give them something, it would be a passion for what Les Paul was doing
Mhm.
for his entire life and for all the artists that he worked with. It's so incredibly cool that you guys have done this, and that the foundation, it strives to keep that going,
Yeah.
because it is. I heard somebody else compare this to the invention of a television or the invention of a computer or
Yeah.
whatever. Like this is the significance
he's
of
like
this,
an
the
Edison
importance.
or-
He is an Edison. He is this is the light bulb for us. This is like,
Yeah.
this is literally the genesis of how we now have SoundCloud rappers. Like if we didn't have this, we couldn't have that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's very cool. How many of those sessions do you have? Like how many of those?
We have those full stem trees to do this for about 200 songs.
Wow. How long did that take?
Well, I've only gotten through preparing.
It's taken
100.
my whole life, man.
Yeah. Well, it took about 6 months to get about 100 of them lined up,
Wow.
just ready to mix.
Yeah.
And then, the console took a year to restore. It took a year to move it out here and wire this place. So I've only really mixed maybe 12 of the 200. But in that 200, there's 50 or so unreleased songs that are
no one's
completely
ever heard
finished,
before.
never heard. There's, he just left us so much stuff. There'll be new music for, I have all of his first pressing records from his house that I put on to check. He had his own chamber built into the house, like into the side of a mountain next to his house. I went and took IR response, impulse responses of his chamber.
That's
so we
cool.
have that to use. He had could look at pictures and see he had an Altec 604 in the chamber.
Right.
So once I had her vocal isolated, not only did we do the IR response, but then I played the vocal through to record that, just so I know what it's supposed to sound like, so I could check it. So I'm really trying to get it to sound exactly like his stuff, but just a little more listenable. And
such a cool journey, such a cool thing to do. Again, I commend you so much. I think it is so important. I think that if we can build back the passion and all this stuff, that people, we lost a little bit of it because it became a little bit of, my engineer is just a guy that has a laptop that has Pro Tools. My engineer just knows how to use Pro Tools, but literally everything that's in there comes from here. It comes from this. It comes from this. This is the starting point for all of that. And that's the stuff that if we build that back into people, we teach people that. I love that this is here. I love that this piece of history is here. It's such a cool thing to have, this intersection between Les and Bill right here at 6050 Sunset, where literally modern recording is birthed. It's like right here in this building with all this stuff. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, I think it was sort of meant to end up here.
Yeah. Tom, thank you so much for showing us all this stuff. This is so cool.
Thanks for coming.
How do we find more about the Les Paul Recording Studio? How do people get in here? How do people work here? How do people get
All
their
the-
students in here?
All the info is on the website. It's les-paul.com, and you can get contact info and everything about the studio and foundation and everything.
Every engineer that is good at his job traces his lineage back to Les Paul and Bill Putnam, like myself included. I can tell you exactly the people who got from there to here, to this day. So having this here and having a real-time historical building like this and giving this to the world is amazing. So I really appreciate what you're doing. It's so cool.
Thanks for coming.